your access to local food and basically like ranch to table style producers has never been easier, and it's never been harder. It's never been easier because with the internet, you could buy local Montana beef from me wherever you are in the country, and I can have it to you in 48 hours. However, there's also a lot of bullshit out there that claims that they're doing all these things that's selling you a completely different product. We are a hormone-free program, like no hormones ever. I just personally believe that, for what I want to be feeding my family and be the best steward I can of that livestock, that the program that we run, in my opinion, works the best for what we're trying to do.
When you talk about the COVID era, and now that people are very, very concerned about food, where the food comes from, how the food is processed. We have now this reprocessed beef that's making its way into supermarkets, and there's not a lot of trust in institutions anymore. And I don't think there's a lot of trust in the food supply. People are, I have an autistic daughter, and we wonder, what is it? What is it causing? Is it something in the food? Are mothers exposed to something in utero? Is the vaccines, whatever it may be? But you see that people are really concerned about this, and it's a big topic. What are the big exposures? What are your biggest concerns as you feed your family and you look at the food supply? Where do you find the points of that are the biggest threats?
Yeah, again, great question. So, I think it's a couple things. Number one, I think going back for the first time, a lot of Americans that had gotten very comfortable with the fact that, like, you go to the grocery store, the product is there, right? And there's a level of complacency, I think, that has kind of like crept into the country, that all these things are always going to be there no matter what. During COVID, we started to actually see the cracks as that system got stressed to where people didn't have access to those things, right? And whether it was toilet paper or beef, when people didn't have access to the things that they were used to having, you saw kind of what the response was. And then there was a demographic of people that, that hunted, that had gardens, that, I wouldn't necessarily call these people like preppers by any means. They just had more of a substance style lifestyle, right? And it could just be because they like doing those things as hobbies, but those skills and access to those things obviously had value. If you had I joke, but like if you had a bunch, you really didn't even need toilet paper. But if you had a bunch of toilet paper and a bunch of venison or beef in a freezer, it wasn't too bad, right? Yeah, you were doing great. But I think for us, and I think for a lot of people now, is number one, I think there's a number of things out there that has had these like kind of slick marketing gimmicks to try to get people on board. I'd call those like these fake meats, these different, whether they're like meat additives, etc., that are ultimately, in my opinion, 100% profit driven and not driven for the health and well-being of the people eating it. And I think you've got a ton of money behind those things, a ton of marketing, and and I think with that though, people then start to kind of look inversely and say, like, okay, like, what is the system and where is my food coming from other than those things, right? And now I think people really want to know not only who, but where their food is coming from. And so nothing wrong with it, but the beef system basically is a phase line system where I would produce calves and I would sell them to you as at a certain size. You would sell them to somebody else. They would sell them to somebody else. They would get sold ultimately to like a feed and finishing yard, who gets sold to a packing plant that gets processed and distributed nationwide. That doesn't happen locally or even regionally. It really is a nationwide thing. And again, there's a need for that system to feed the number of people that we have in this country and give them access to high quality food. However, within that system, you lose traceability and quality assurance from producer to producer. So one person could do a great job, somebody could do a terrible job. Great job, terrible job. There's no way to know that unless you are single sourcing and raising those cattle on your own.
Right.
And I think that has become one of the biggest things. And I think when you look at the amount of import beef that isn't necessarily disclosed as import beef, the way that people buy unknown regional live cattle and or box beef and relabel it as something it's different. I think consumers are starting to become far more educated, and I tell people all the time, your access to local food and basically like ranch to table style producers has never been easier, and it's never been harder. It's never been easier because with the internet, you could buy local Montana beef from me wherever you are in the country, and I can have it to you in 48 hours. However, there's also a lot of bullshit out there that claims that they're doing all these things that's selling you a completely different product than what they're marketing
Because
to.
there's no
And I
way to
think,
really grade their homework, right? It's very difficult. So in the worst scenarios, what are people eating in their beef that they would be alarmed to as they put in like the fillers and things to increase the weight? What are they putting in there?
to be honest, I don't know. I'm not an expert on these things. I think that what I've heard called like pink sludge, I think it's just reprocessed, broken down. Um, I don't even know exactly what it is, but it's basically re-injected back into that product. Um, Again, you're not going to find this at your, you know, at these like smaller to mid-size. They don't even have the capacity or the capability to do this. You'd have to be at like a pretty specific place that is set up for that. I've seen these things on these like meat binders or glues where they take different things and try to pawn it off as something else. Again, I have no idea what that's made of. I wouldn't want to ingest it into my body. I think on the if you look more on the traditional side of taking those things out of it, right? I think there's a lot of people want to know about whether it's a hormone program that's typically used to, grow cattle faster. Um, the types of
Antibiotics. What do you think?
antibiotics,
Growth, antibiotics, and
yep,
how they were cared for, and then how they were
correct.
processed, right? So
Correct. Vaccinations, there's all these things, right? And so I'll tell you a little bit about our program. And again, this is just what we do. We just think that this works well. Um, we are a hormone-free program, like no hormones ever. We do use antibiotics for sick cattle. We so all of those antibiotics basically have what I would call like a clean time. So if you give one of those antibiotics, there's a recommended time prior to that animal being processed that antibiotic would be completely flushed out of that system, right? So we double those clean times. And what happens is if you have, let's say, newborn calves, right, and they get pneumonia, if you don't treat them with an antibiotic, there's a high probability that they're going to die. There's a number of programs out there that are no hormones, no antibiotics, and and we could be one of those where we would sort those cattle completely out of the system, and we do have the ability and can run that as a program. I think personally, as a producer, the better answer is having a basically a vaccination protocol that you follow when those cattle are young to prevent them from getting sick, to common illness. We utilize antibiotics to treat sick cattle. However, if those cattle were treated within a certain time frame prior to being processed, they would be basically eliminated from our beef program altogether and basically just sold as commodity beef. And
gotcha.
so and there's so many studies out there, to be perfectly honest, on the effects of hormones and vaccines and antibiotics and all these different things. I honestly think that you could find information that's like pro con any of those things at this point. Um, I just personally believe that, for what I want to be feeding my family and be the best steward I can of that livestock, that the program that we run, in my opinion, works the best for what we're trying to do.
As the beef is just going through this I guess it's life cycle, right? So what are the concerns as far as how they care for the animals? Because you have a lot of people that they want some type of holistic treatment. They don't want the animals to be cruelty free. How do you ensure that, and what's the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, what we would kind of consider low stress stock handling is what we implement through every one of those phase lines in our program. And because we own those cattle and have ownership in those phase lines ourselves, we obviously have like managerial management decisions, and we do specific training in low stress stock handling. There's a program, Certified Angus Beef. It's called BQE. That's basically a livestock training program with a big focus on this kind of low stress. But ultimately, what you see, to be honest, is the lower the stress that those animals are subjected to, the higher performance they have throughout the rest of their life cycle. That could be environmental stress. So, if you calve those, if they're born and it's -40 and they almost die because they freeze to death in the first 48 hours of their life and then they get sick, you'll see that same animal continue to get sick throughout its life. It's almost like chronically ill. If you take the same group of animals and it's, you know, 60 degrees and sunny and they're on green grass and they're healthy from the beginning, even if they get sick kind of like midway in that process,
They're more
they're
resilient.
going to recover and remain healthy much better. You're also going to see performance in how they gain. So when we put those cattle like on feed, they're going to gain more, which ultimately is the goal. They're also going to perform better on the rail. So you're going to see higher percentages of premium product in that what we would consider to be like upper choice and prime grading. You're all of those things, and we stress this on our staff and on our team, and they're really good about it. All of the operational decisions that you make throughout that entire process has an impact. It's a positive impact or a negative impact. So the way that those cattle get treated in the pasture, the way that they get treated if they're closer to facilities, those are all operational decisions that we make, and we almost have like a metric that we follow, that that way everybody's kind of on the same sheet of music. But it's really amazing. And even the infrastructure that you have, when we started our ranch, we had no working infrastructure. So we would work out of these metal panels. So just think about like portable fencing and a portable what in kind of cattle terms it would be called a tub, and in an alley. So there's a tub that basically the cattle go into, the door gets shut, they walk down the alley, and you can load them into a chute on a truck, but you got to get them into some sort of facility to get them to do those things. What it would take us to do those, just from the numbers, et cetera, that we could do with this kind of like temporary setup, was really hard on the people, and it was definitely harder on the cattle. Now that we have the working infrastructure in place that we've built and designed specifically for those things over time, now me and two other guys can load 1,000 head of cattle in a couple hours, super low stress, super quiet. And when those cattle go on to that like next phase, there is a marked noticeable difference in their performance just from those changes in infrastructure and management practices. And that absolutely affects your bottom line from a profitability standpoint. And it has a major impact on the performance and quality of both your female cattle, which would kind of come back into the system as like the factory, as well as the steers that would typically go into the beef program.
Well, I know when you're hunting wild game, right? And there's a difference between an animal that's harvested quickly and an animal that is it's stressed or it runs for a long time because you get lactic acid and things in the meat. What is it that goes? What makes the difference between a good steak and a bad steak when it comes to harvesting?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. Number one, the way that those cattle are managed when they're getting on and off the trucks can create basically a lot of bruising if not done properly, if done too fast, if using there are these little like cattle prodders basically that people use that can create bruising and damage to that carcass, which ultimately would lead to like a very bad eating experience, but also typically that gets cut out. Um, High stress can lead what would be called dark cutters, where you have cattle that actually don't pass USDA like grading and or checklist because of that. And a lot of that is stress induced. So again, making sure that those cattle are handled and managed in a very like specific way, all the way up to the process of where they're being slaughtered. The facilities that we work with, everything down to them stepping in to, ultimately, which is the slaughter box. It feels like it's something that they've done a bunch. If they're coming in and out of a chute, it's quiet, they're led up to there, they're not stressed, they're not forced into there, and it's done in a very like humane and efficient manner that also takes into account that there's a job to get done. But every single one of those things has a major impact on ultimately how that beef is going to perform when it's on your plate, when it's on your grill. And I think for us, a lot of producers don't take it all the way through that entire process. So it'd almost be like if you're like a winemaker or a brewery or a distiller who never tried your own product. Like, how do you know how you're actually performing? We see that and track that all the way through to every animal, and we're able to make operational decisions on the live side of the operation based on how our cattle perform on the rail and their grade and all their things, etc. Then, and again, all these topics, like because we're involved in every single level of it, you have to have kind of an expertise in all of it. But we also worked with some like the top culinary professionals, in my opinion, in the country as we developed our post-processing system or procedures that also is going to ensure max flavor, tenderness, and really give our beef kind of like a unique um I think it again all ties into kind of the overall quality, but it's almost like RIP. And the way that we do that is specific and different from a lot of other people out there. And then there's variations to that. We could take that and we could go into a true dry aging process, which is very different from like a hanging aging process. So you see, there's all these like marketing terms and they're like slightly different. And some of them are kind of that, and some of them are really that. And, you know, with the different restaurants and the folks that we work with, we've really been able to kind of develop what I'll call like these specific programs for those customers that give them unique experience with our product as well as competitive advantage, because typically we won't do that same exact thing for somebody else. Where a lot of other beef companies, it's just quantity, quantity, quantity. Our whole game, just like produce the Navy SEALs, is quality, quality, quality. If you want to increase your quantity, you cannot have a decrease in quality. You have to drive it. Your standards of excellence has to stay what it is, regardless of how much pressure you're getting from like a business
You don't
perspective to grow.
compromise that for volume.
Correct.
So all right, we want to know, how does Greg Putnam cook a steak? What's the best way to get the best flavor out of the meat?
So I'll give you two ways that I think are the best, and I'll use two different examples. If I have like a really big cowboy cut or tomahawk ribeye, I'll use the reverse sear method. Have you ever done that?
No, I don't. I'm not
Okay.
familiar.
So this is a great method. So basically take your steak out of the refrigerator. Let's say this. If it's frozen, put it in the refrigerator day before, thaw it out completely. A couple hours before, put it on your counter so that it actually gets to warm temperature, or I'm sorry, room temperature, so that you have basically even cooking throughout. So you do that, open up your package, salt on the outside. The bigger the steak, the more salt you can use. Let that sit with that salt on there for, maybe about an hour or so before you cook it. And then what you do is you set your grill up in typically around like 225 degrees, and you put that steak on there at 225, and the only thing you really need is an internal temperature gauge. So put your internal temperature gauge in there and then take that up. If you want to go to medium rare, you basically would cook that thing at 225 till you hit internal temperature of 125. You would pull it off your grill, and it does not look very good at this point. You wrap it in tin foil, and then you heat your grill up as hot as it can go. Once your grill is about as hot as it can go, unwrap that steak out of that tin foil and do about 2 to 3 minutes each side. And it's going to sear the outside of it now and take your internal temperature somewhere between like 130 to 135. And if you have that gauge in there, you'll know exactly where it is. So the nice thing about this, there's no guessing of the doneness of that steak. And your buddies are going to think that you're like a steak master because you will like you will truly nail medium rare. Um, and it eats amazing. And what it does is it gives that fat like a chance to render down. And it's kind of like a little bit of like a slow cooking process, followed by that nice char that we all like. Um, that's option one. Option two, which I just did this the other night with an outside skirt steak. I did like a salt and pepper and like just like a pretty mild rub. Like I want to see the beef like stand up on its own. I'm a big proponent of just like salt and pepper, even just salt. Um, really see the quality of that beef. Try different types of beef. Um, but I took this and then on that one, I got my grill super hot and I did basically the opposite. So I seared the outside first and then I did like a finish cook and that's kind of like a longer like thinner piece of meat so it doesn't take as long. And then I'd use that on a steak salad. But I think the two best options are either your reverse sear or direct sear method if you're just cooking a steak. And a lot of that then comes down to how thick is the steak you're cooking. Because sometimes if you go with a direct sear on a super thick steak, the outside gets super done before the middle has a chance to cook. That's where that reverse sear really
And
shines.
so do you have direct to customer business? So
We
they
do. Yeah.
so they can go
Yep.
online and they can order Montana beef straight to their house.
Yep, correct. So we work with a couple partners. We have a veteran partner, Valor Provisions, that we work with. That allows basically people to buy more like what I'd call like cattle shares. And then we have a distribution partner called CrowdCal. You can access both those through our website. What's really cool about the way we do ours is you can go on and you pick the cuts you want, you build the box you want. We don't try to push a whole bunch of stuff on you where you go like, oh, if you want to buy this, you got to get all of this. We distribute enough beef evenly that we're basically able to let people go on pick and choose the cuts they want. We'll run sometimes some like specialty boxes. We'll do like a griller box or a sample box if people want that, but you actually have the ability just to click and drag whatever cuts that you want. I will warn you, like, our we are almost to a point now where all of the beef that we process on a monthly basis is pre-allocated. So a certain amount of that goes online, a certain amount of that goes to our restaurants, and um, we do have limited supply because back to that
You got to get the
quality
quality,
first.
right?
Correct. Yep. Yeah, a lot of places like as soon as they start to get some kind of like momentum, the first thing they do is put more cattle into the system. But typically, those aren't people that are actually producing those cattle all the way through. And so for us to be able to do that, it takes a and we are building towards we're always building and growing towards that, but we're doing it in a way that we know is going to retain the quality that we're that's really we've built our reputation on.
Yeah. So your business partner is also a SEAL. Is he a congressman as well?
He's a senator now. Yeah, so Senator Tim Sheehy, and I we worked together at a SEAL command, started working together in 2012. He got out a little bit before I did. Started two like really successful companies, one in aerial wildfire support, and one that was a military technologies company that I ultimately came into as soon as I got out of the Navy. And the military tech defense company ultimately got acquired by CACI or CACI in 2019. And ultimately, then Tim and I partnered together with his brother as well and started the ranch in 2020. I'd been doing some side cattle stuff since I got out. And when we had the opportunity to come together and do this again, we started Little Belt Cattle Company. And then last year, um, Tim made the move back into service and ran for the Senate here in Montana and defeated, I want to say he was potentially fourth term or going into his fourth term, but he defeated John Tester in probably one of like the biggest races last year in the Senate. Like Tim had never, he had not run for office before and came into like a highly, highly, you know, contested race. One of the for dollars per vote for like the number of votes that was there in Montana for the dollars spent, it was I believe it was the highest like dollar per vote of any of the races last year. And ultimately, the Democrats went with a policy when Tim came into this thing, he had um 3% name recognition.
Wow.
Yeah, very tough to do when you're so he went literally like town to town and met with as many people as he could. But the other thing that happened was they were putting about $1 million a week in negative campaign ads out against Senator Sheehy. What that did was basically give him name recognition that he wasn't able to compete with on a dollar
No
basis.
press is bad press.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so Tim made this point, or Senator Sheehy made this point, still getting used to the transition there. Um, Senator Sheehy made this point the other day. If they had spent $1 million talking about what a great guy and job John Tester had
No
done,
one,
they
yeah.
probably would have beat him. And, when you look at politics today, I think it was pretty interesting because, here was a guy that number one had a strong, track record of service, and service to this country. Was a guy that came out of the military and was successful and then wanted to go back in to service and ultimately was successful, and he's doing an amazing job. It's been an incredible experience to kind of watch that whole thing from, a friend perspective, a business partner perspective, and a supporter perspective. And it was it was it was crazy. Anybody in Montana at that time knows what I'm talking about. I mean, you couldn't turn on a TV, your YouTube, a radio without hearing these. And again, at the end of the day, none of these things were based on like, we don't like your policies, we don't like your positions. They are personal attacks and made up
Character
personal attacks.
assassination and ridicule.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. In my opinion, it's frankly, it's designed, it's systematically designed to scare other good people from wanting to go into that. And I think now more than ever, you know, we need good people. We need honest people. We need people that are going to come in with a service mindset versus a personal gain
Yeah. Self
mindset.
enrichment.
And yeah, and back like I was saying, like in the SEAL teams, like when you actually have a service-based mindset, and I would say the businesses that Tim's been involved with, the businesses that him and I have been involved with together, have always had a a a function kind of outside of ourselves. And number one was our first business together was to help the warfighter have technology to counter emerging threats. His firefighting company was designed to put firefighters out more efficiently, effectively, and in a quicker time frame. Our beef company is based around feeding and providing high quality, nutrient dense beef to America. Those types of people that are focused and have a true like service to others before themselves mindset, like Senator Sheehy does, I think are the type of people we should be encouraging to go into politics. And I mean, who wants to go into these things anymore? You watch your family get trashed, your businesses get trashed, your friends get trashed, and the goal isn't to beat you, it's to destroy you. And I think Tim really kind of broke the mold to a certain extent for a person with the right prerequisites to come in and kind of brave all of that for the right reasons. And at the end of the day, he was successful and he ran what I would consider to be like a professional and positive campaign, and they went with an unprofessional negative approach. And ultimately, it cost them not only the election here in Montana, but that was the tipping vote that decided the Senate, which now has a major impact on how votes are
Well,
being
absolutely.
decided.
It's the power structure. So, where can people find your beef company? Where can they find you online, and where can they learn more about your business?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, these podcasts are amazing because I think it's a great way for customers to get, a deeper education, and they can start to self-identify when they start to see, websites, other videos, other people's profiles, etc. And they can start to identify like what they want or what they expect from the operations that they're buying their beef from. And I tell people this all the time. A prerequisite for liking Little Belt Cattle Company isn't that you have to hate everybody else. We do things a certain way. We think, the way that we do business is producing a product that we're really proud of. There's a lot of great producers out there, and I think if you're buying American and you're buying local, then you're supporting the producers that we need to secure the food system into the future. So for us, you can find us online, www.littlebeltcattleco.com. You can find us on Instagram. That's probably our main social media. That's at Little Belt Cattle Co. You can find me on Instagram at Greg Putnam Official. And our Instagram account, we try to give people a transparent look at the live cattle production side, the processing, and then the beef side of the house. So you can really kind of see all of that. And we try to be very like seasonal within what we're showing people. Like we're not showing you a bunch of pictures we took, 3 summers ago. We're showing you like up to date, so that people do have an appreciation and a little bit more of that like connection back to their food. And I think like an amazing thing with social media and people's access now today is that you actually can really see for yourself kind of what these things should look like, and you can start to differentiate the places that may be marketing to you but not necessarily following through versus the places that are doing it the way they say
Yeah,
they're
I
doing
think I think we're getting pretty close to pick your cow. I mean, that's where
it. Yeah.
it's gonna be window shopping for the actual animal unit that you're gonna turn into a steak, man. But I enjoyed talking to you. I enjoyed learning about your business, and I'm very grateful for your service. And I'm glad there are guys out like you with your skill sets applying it to the food supply. So everyone go check out what is it, Little Belt Cattle Company?
Yep. Little Belt Cattle Company, littlebeltcattleco.com. Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to get to the point where I would love to see even in large, retail and grocery where there's a barcode that you can scan and the ranch that beef came from comes up and you're able to do further, kind of research into that. Like I said, I mean, supporting local producers, supporting American producers, buying beef that you are comfortable and confident that you know who and where it came from has never been easier. There's a lot of great producers out there. We greatly appreciate the support. We greatly appreciate all the people out there. We appreciate the industry as a first generation ranch that has accepted us and helped us learn, grow, and build. The Black Angus Association recently did a piece about what we've been doing, and we've just had so much support from everybody. And I can't tell you how much, as like a number one to startup business and a first generation ranch, it really means a lot to us, and it's hugely appreciated.
Well, you're a badass, Greg, and so I'm excited to buy one of your steaks and reverse sear it, and I'm going to report back to you, man. And hopefully, sometime in the future, we can share a campfire and maybe a steak.
I'd love that. Well, open invite out to Montana. Come check us out. And we would love nothing more than to do that. So thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time to have us on.
You bet. God bless, brother. Take care.
Yeah, you too.